Snowboard Kids is a sports-style racing game that released for the Nintendo 64 on December 12, 1997 in Japan, and early 1998 for the rest of the world. It was published by Atlas and developed by a company then known as Shotgame, a game developer that I assume not many people are familiar with for a number of reasons. One is that they changed their name to Rockjin in the year 2000 to make it easier to pronounce by their largely Japanese audience. In addition to this, Rockjin haven't really made any games that would be considered mainstream, I guess would be a good way to say it. Most of their portfolio consists of games targeted at a Japanese audience, as well as spin-offs of other media franchises. In recent years, they seem to have fallen into a more supplementary role in the gaming industry, meaning they mostly provide support for bigger companies like Nintendo. In fact, on their official website, they tout their work on rather large games like Paper Mario: The Origami King and Mario and Sonic at the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. However, there was a time where Rockjin, or Rockdim, whatever you want to call them, worked on games that could be considered solely their own. The most prolific, in my opinion, being the game we're here to talk about today, Snowboard Kids. If you are a kid who grew up on the N64 like me, chances are you've at least heard of Snowboard Kids. It was highly rated by a number of gaming publications at the time, and even sold enough copies to warrant the creation of a standalone sequel. However, the Snowboard Kids games weren't the only snowboarding games on the N64. In probably one of the weirdest twists of fate ever, Nintendo EAD released their own snowboarding game titled 1080 Snowboarding that would eventually become the 24th best-selling N64 game of all time, only a few months after Snowboard Kids released. This no doubt had an adverse effect on its sales and its current position in the gaming zeitgeist as more of a cult classic type game for the N64. But the fact that Snowboard Kids was able to sell well enough to warrant a sequel, despite being up against a game developed by the people who literally made the N64, speaks volumes about its quality and appeal in my opinion. But I think we're getting just a bit too ahead of ourselves here, so let's back it up and actually pop Snowboard Kids into the N64, shall we? Luckily, my old cartridge still works. So the first thing we see when we boot up the game, other than the company logos, is a short music video style cutscene that sort of hypes up the game. It's set to probably one of the best and most iconic songs in an N64 game in my opinion. It's a song I've loved since I was a kid, and without playing the game in over 20 years, I still remembered it like I just heard it yesterday. Definitely a classic. But once that cutscene's over, we're greeted with the title screen to the game. I personally really like the motion that the various characters lend to this title screen, which in my opinion makes it very visually appealing. Some companies write off the title screen as something you only see for a second or two before starting the game, and just make it something simple like a still image. However, in my opinion, when a company has the care and attention to detail to make a really appealing title screen like this, it shows they really cared about the game they were making. Now from the title screen we have three options to choose from. Start, which takes you to the main menu, Lesson, which is a tutorial that teaches you the basics of the game, and Option, which has a few settings you can play around with. Let's go ahead and just jump right into the main game. First things first, we're told to choose the number of players from 1 to 4. You must have the appropriate number of controllers plugged in to select one of the multiplayer options. However, we're going to start out with just the single player modes, so we'll go with just one player. The next thing that happens is that the game will check to see that you have a controller pack, the N64's equivalent of a memory card that was connected to the port on the bottom of the controller. If you don't have one of these packs, you won't be able to save, so I'd say it's definitely a must. After the game loads your save, it will ask you to put in a rumble pack if you want to use one. The rumble pack uses the same port as the controller pack, so what the game does is load your save file from the memory pack into the console's internal memory for the duration of the play session, so you can switch to using the rumble pack if you so choose. I don't really care about rumble personally, so I just keep the controller pack in while I play. If you do use rumble, you'll need to put the controller pack back in when you're done playing to save. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but that's how saving sometimes worked back in the day. The next and final step before you get to the actual game is to select your character from the 5 starting characters. There's Slash, Nancy, Jam, Linda, and my personal favorite, Tommy. They all have very unique and fun designs that really elevate the charm of the game a lot in my opinion. I mean, the name of the game is Snowboard Kids, so it's pretty clear that the characters are meant to be the stars of the show here. Other sports racing games like Wave Race 64 don't really spotlight the characters very much, and in my opinion that's a big shame. Having an interesting roster of characters like the one we see in Snowboard Kids can really make a game much more memorable to the average player. I mean, who are you more likely to remember? A chubby kid with a big bandage on his even bigger nose stuffing burgers into his mouth, or a generic racer whose only defining trait is that he has a name? I know my answer. However, there is one thing that other racers' rosters have over Snowboard Kids, and that is the placement of the character select screen in the game. In Snowboard Kids, once you select your character, you're locked in until you exit the game. This honestly gets pretty annoying when you get to the point in the game where you have to try to find the best combination of character and board to win a specific race. This wouldn't have been an issue if the characters didn't have stats and it was all up to the board, but that's not the route the developers took. This particular structure of racing game, where character choice affects how well you do, is one of my biggest pet peeves in gaming. I just want to play the character I like the most. In this case, that's Tommy, like I said before. However, Tommy has really bad turning, so he becomes basically unusable on later tracks that have a lot of sharp turns, which means I had to play someone else for those. Luckily, I like all the characters in Snowboard Kids, so it wasn't a huge deal this time around, but it's still somewhat annoying to not be able to play the character I want to play. I understand that giving characters individual stats makes them more unique, but I think the trade-off of making some characters better than others is too great. But anyway, let's put that behind us and move on to the main menu. On the main menu, we have a total of 5 options. 3 of these are gameplay modes, namely Battle Race, Skill Game, and Time Attack. We also have Mr. Dog's Board Shop, which is where you can buy new boards and change their paint. I feel like I've seen this guy somewhere before, but I can't put my finger on it. Where was it? It's right on the tip of my tongue. No, this is going to drive me nuts. But in all seriousness, it's pretty cool that they put me in the game. I mean, I love Snowboard Kids and all, but this was pretty unexpected. The only sad part is Mr. Dog isn't a playable character. He is, however, playable in Snowboard Kids 2, so you know I'm going to do a video on that at some point. Best character in the game, easy. And the last option is Exit/Save, which lets you guessed it, exit and save your game. But of these 5 options, the main attractions here are clearly the 3 gameplay modes, so let's get down to business and talk about them. First and foremost, you've got Battle Race. This is where you'll most likely be spending the bulk of your time with Snowboard Kids. You start with a choice of 6 races that you can do in any order you like. Since this is a snowboarding game, it stands to reason that many of the courses would be snow-covered, and that is of course true, but there's actually a surprising amount of variety here. Of these 6 starting stages, the last 2 are a grassy valley and an amusement park, with the other 4 being different types of snow courses. However, even among the snow courses, there is a decent level of variety in concept. There's a highway, a mountain filled with adorable snowmen, a rocky gorge, and a classic snowboarding hill. And as you might have guessed, once you complete all 6 base courses, you unlock a new one, and once you beat that course, you unlock another, which leads to one final course for a total of 9 tracks. These unlockable courses bring even further variety in the form of a desert, some sort of mountainous park, and a traditional Japanese village that lets you experience all 4 seasons as you ride through the course. Like I said, there's a pretty good balance here between snow courses and non-snow courses, which I think is a big plus for the game. And in my opinion, this balance is something that could have been achieved only by a game styled like Snowboard Kids. Other more serious sports games are bound by what is realistically possible, so snowboarding down an amusement park on a mountain would definitely be out of the question. But not for Snowboard Kids, and that's what I love about it. Before we get into the actual gameplay though, let me just mention how much I adore the preview art for each course. They're all so cute and stylized, which also gives you a good idea of how each course is laid out. My favorite's probably Ninja Land, just because we get to see Mr. Dog with a top knot and a kimono, but they're all really great. This is just another example of the care and attention to detail the developers had. They really add a lot to the charm of the experience. But now let's talk gameplay. And the gameplay of Battle Race is your classic Snowboard Kids gameplay that makes up the core of the experience. You, along with 3 CPUs, compete in a race on each individual track over a varying number of laps. However, unlike other racing games, where the courses are perfect loops, the tracks of Snowboard Kids are all mountains, so that wouldn't really fly. In order to circumvent this, you will take a chairlift from the bottom of the course back up to the top at the end of each lap until the final one. Only one character can enter the lift at a time, so this makes for some rather frantic scenarios around the gate of the lift. I personally think this chairlift system is really great, because it adds to the overall feeling that you're actually snowboarding. Not to mention the sound it makes when you enter the lift. It's super satisfying. Now, the way you actually control yourself as you board down the mountain is actually rather simple. Since gravity does all the work here, you don't have to worry about holding down any sort of throttle or gas button. The only thing you have to do is turn. Turning is done by moving the stick left or right for a normal turn, or diagonal down left or right for a sharp turn. It might seem a bit weird, but it actually becomes quite intuitive once you get the hang of it. You can complete a race by just turning and doing nothing else, but there are a few other options available to you. For one thing, there are items for helping you and hindering your opponents, much like in Mario Kart or Diddy Kong Racing. However, in Snowboard Kids, there are two types of items, of which you can hold one of each at a time. These item archetypes are known as chutes and, well, items. Chutes can be found in the red boxes found scattered about each course that are labeled with an S, and items can be found in the blue boxes that are labeled with an I. Chutes are items that can be shot at enemies by using the Z button. There are many different types of chutes, each having a different effect on the enemy they come in contact with, as well as a varying level of homing. My one problem with these chutes is that they always come in a set of 3, even the ones that have really good homing. I get that this was done to make the races more fun and hectic, but it also has the side effect of making for some rather annoying situations where you get chained by a bunch of chutes in a row. When this happens, the chances of catching up are very slim, especially on later courses. I think limiting the homing chutes to only one item per box would have been a much better solution and still would have made the game just as fun, if not more. One of the more unique gameplay mechanics of Snowboard Kids is that you actually have to buy the items you use during the race, each item box costing 100 gold to buy. You can acquire gold by picking up coins on the course or by doing tricks. Tricks are performed by holding down the A button before a jump and inputting a direction or series of directions. You can also perform a grab by using the C buttons in the air even during a normal trick. The amount of gold you get from each trick is based on the trick's difficulty, with your character's special moves netting the most possible gold. Tricks aren't a necessary part of the race, but they do make them more fun and help give you an advantage over your opponents by giving you gold to buy items. So the way a typical race and battle race mode will go is that you race down a hill, taking the curves as best as possible, picking up coins and doing tricks along the way to get gold to buy items that you use to inhibit your opponents or help you get a leg up on them. This will continue until you complete all the laps of the race, and hopefully you'll come in first at the end. The goal of Battle Race mode is to place first in all 9 races, at which point the credits will roll and you'll have cleared the main portion of the game. You also unlock the best character in terms of stats, Shino being the ninja, by completing this mode. Personally, I really liked Battle Race mode. It's an interesting spin on a traditional arcade mode where instead of having to start from the beginning every time you lose, you just have to do the current race over again. This is a welcome change because of what I was talking about earlier, with the stats of each character mattering quite a bit to your chances at winning a race. It's just a simple and fun game mode that plays very well to the strengths of Snowboard Kids gameplay. Battle Race was clearly meant to be the main mode of the game, as it's the longest, most fleshed out mode, and features the credits at the end. However, there are still some other modes to be had here. Skill Game is the next on the list, and it's a mode that's actually split up into 3 smaller games. You've got Speed Game, which is a mode where you try to get to the finish line as fast as possible by collecting the boosts that are placed along the course. There's also Shotgame, where you're tasked with shooting a bunch of snowmen positioned at various locations around each track. This one's my favorite. As well as Trick Game, which is just a mode for doing as many tricks as possible in the allotted time. They're essentially mini-games that give you something else to do when you don't really want to race. Shotgame is definitely the highlight here just because of how unique it is for a game like this, but I wouldn't say any of them are really a must-play. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely some fun to be had here, but once you play each game a few times, there's really no reason to go back if you're not interested in high scores. The same can also be said for Time Attack, the last gameplay mode here. Time Attack lets you pick any of the 9 courses from Battle Race and try to get the best time possible. You might be wondering what the difference to Speed Game is, and there is a slight one. For one thing, Speed Game only lets you play on 3 courses for whatever reason, while Time Attack lets you race anywhere you like. Time Attack also only has 1 boost that you start with, so you can race freely without having to adjust in order to pick up boosts along the way. In all honesty though, the difference is marginal at best and really doesn't warrant its own mode. The replay montage at the end is pretty cool though. And that's all the gameplay modes in single player. In my opinion, while I did really enjoy myself with a lot of the modes, I constantly felt like something was missing, some big overarching mode to tie everything together. I personally think a story mode would have been perfect for this game. I know that it would have required more data and work, but it could have been done rather easily in my opinion. All the courses and characters are already done, so you would really only have to write some dialogue and connect everything with, say, a big tournament or something like that. This would have made the game worlds better in my opinion, and possibly could have even allowed it to surpass its competitors in terms of sales. Like I said earlier, one of the best parts about this game is its unique charm, brought about by the various characters, courses, and gameplay elements found throughout the game. So in my opinion, a story mode that played off these myriad charming elements would have been a no-brainer and an easy home run. Sadly, that's not how the developers felt this time around. We do get a glimpse into what a story mode could have been like while watching the characters interact during the credits, and I really liked it. Probably one of the biggest missed opportunities in a game I've reviewed. But enough whining, let's talk about something cool, the board shop.
Welcome!
Like I said before, the board shop, run by myself, is a place where you can buy new boards and paint the boards you already own. There are a total of 14 different paints to use, making for a pretty wide selection. There are 4 board sections here: Freestyle, All Around, Alpine, and Special. Each category has its own strengths and weaknesses, just like the characters. Pairing the right board with the right character can be the difference between coming in dead last and first, so it's actually extremely important to get acquainted with the board shop. Each board of the 3 main styles in the shop has 3 levels. As the levels get higher, the board gets better. Pretty simple, right? The 3 special boards, on the other hand, are unlocked by accomplishing various feats, and they all have unique stats and abilities. The best by far is the Star board, which is super fast and handles well. You get it for completing the Battle Race mode, and with it you can actually make Tommy viable, so that's pretty cool. And that's all there is to single player. I didn't have the opportunity to play actual multiplayer this time, but all it is just Battle Race with multiple people. Pretty much what you'd expect, right? The one problem I saw was that the frame rate in multiplayer does dip quite a bit. Normally the game seems to run at around 60 FPS, but in split screen it's probably around 30 or less. It's not a huge deal, but it's definitely noticeable. Alright, now for the last thing I want to talk about, music. Music. The music of Snowboard Kids is some of the best and most memorable in gaming in my opinion. Every course, as well as some portions of the main menu, like the board shop, have their own theme that truly elevates the experience and makes everything you do much more fun. It's hard to describe the style of music used here because it's only really seen in specifically 90s video games like Snowboard Kids and Wave Race, but whatever it is, I love it. If every game had this style of music, I would be completely fine with that. That's how much I like this style. It's a shame it's very rarely used, but I guess that just makes the games that do feature it all the more special and appealing. The music's great, I guess is what I want to say. If you don't believe me, go listen to the soundtrack for yourself. I have no doubt it'll brighten up your day. Snowboard Kids is a perfect example of just how charming even a rather small game can be with the right amount of care and attention to detail. It's this care on the part of the developers that ingrained Snowboard Kids in the hearts and minds of those from my generation who played and loved it growing up, and in my opinion it still has that same effect on players even over 20 years later. It's a classic through and through that deserves to be up on the same pedestal as every other great N64 title. However, it's not a perfect game. The lack of a substantial mode that ties everything together is a real shame. Character switching can get quite annoying, and some of the mechanics can be a bit unfair at times. Of course, those last 2 are very minor complaints, but they are problems nonetheless. But despite its problems, I still thoroughly enjoyed my time with Snowboard Kids, and would 100% recommend you give it a go if you've never played it before. I'm interested to see how the game evolved from Snowboard Kids 1 to 2 and beyond, but that's a topic for another day. You know, these reviews always turn out longer than I initially think. I mean, if a game as small as Snowboard Kids is this long, then what won't be, right? But anyway, thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. It always means a lot to me. If you enjoyed what you saw and heard here today, consider giving the video a like. It's always greatly appreciated and helps me out a ton. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing as well. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Mr. Dog out. Welcome. Come again. Alpine. Freestyle. All around. That's my Mr. Dog impression. Should have called a Mac, but you know, it's all good.